Imagine this. You're standing at the edge of a cliff you didn't choose to climb. Below you, the world sprawls in hyper-saturated colors, laughing couples, bustling streets, achievements glowing on screens, all of it vibrating with a life that feels alien, unreachable. But here, in this silent altitude, the air is different. It's thick with a question that claws at your ribs. What if the void isn't trying to swallow you? What if it's trying to speak? Depression, they say, is a malfunction, a broken circuit in the brain's machinery, a chemical betrayal. But what if that story is incomplete? What if the numbness, the crushing weight, the relentless why? What if these are not symptoms of a disease, but fragments of a code? A code your psyche etched in desperation, trying to warn you about a life that's become unlivable. Consider the paradox. Ancient Stoics practiced premeditatio malorum, the deliberate visualization of loss, failure, even death, not to torment themselves, but to sever their chains to outcomes they couldn't control. Seneca wrote letters about embracing poverty before it arrived. Marcus Aurelius rehearsed his own mortality at dawn. Yet today, we exile all shadows from our minds, demanding relentless positivity while our inner world fractures. What if depression is the modern mind's twisted homage to this lost art? An involuntary, brutal form of negative visualization, screaming, "This is what happens when you abandon your truth. This is the cost of the life you're pretending to want." Feel the dissonance. Society pathologizes your despair, hands you a pill to silence it, but the void keeps humming. It shows you decaying versions of your future, relationships as hollow as varnished coffins, careers that taste like ash, a self so fragmented you no longer recognize your own reflection. Why? Because it's cruel, or because it's the only language left to make you reckon with what you've buried. You've been told to fight it, to win the war against your own mind. But what if this isn't a war? What if it's an exhumation? The great unsettling truth begins here. Your depression might be the most honest part of you, the part that refuses to collude in the lie that everything is fine, the part that would rather shatter than let you spend another decade sleepwalking through a script you didn't write. It drags you to the cliff's edge not to kill you, but to force a choice. Jump into the abyss, or finally turn around and see what's chasing you. But here's the hook buried in your ribs, the question that will not let you go. What if the thing you're running from is the only map you have? You've been taught to fear the dark, to bolt the doors when the shadow self rattles the windows, to numb the ache with curated joy. But step closer. Listen. The labyrinth inside you wasn't built in a day. Its walls were carved by centuries of philosophers howling into the void, by cultures that worshipped progress but exiled despair, by a world that sells happiness like a product but punishes those who can't afford the lie. Let's name the hidden problem. Your depression isn't the enemy. The enemy is the story that told you to hate it. Carl Jung warned that the shadow, the exiled parts of our psyche, doesn't vanish when ignored. It gains power, morphing into an autonomous personality that haunts us. Nietzsche, in his Madness, wrote that when you stare into the abyss, it stares back. But we've misread him. The abyss isn't out there. It's the unacknowledged truth of who you are when the performance crumbles. The grief you've orphaned, the rage you've chloroformed, the primal "no you swallowed to be loved." Society, that great puppeteer, pulls your strings with mantras. Good vibes only. Never quit. Optimize your life. Meanwhile, Schopenhauer's ghost whispers, suffering isn't an error, it's the default condition of existence. Who do you trust? The algorithm selling mindfulness apps, or the philosopher who called life a pendulum swinging between pain and boredom? Here's the psychological trap. Positive thinking has become a tyranny. Aldous Huxley's Brave New World imagined a dystopia pacified by pleasure, where citizens gulped soma to mute their unease. We've outsourced our soma to Instagram affirmations, productivity cults, and the toxic creed that pain is a puzzle to solve, not a signal to heed. Jean-Paul Sartre called this bad faith, the act of lying to oneself to escape the terrifying freedom of being human. Your depression? It might be the antidote to the lie, the part of you that screams, "I will not pretend this is enough." But the mind, that desperate architect, tries to protect you. When your job drains your soul, it conjures fatigue. When your relationships suffocate you, it numbs your heart. When your life becomes a museum of others' expectations, it wraps you in a cocoon of apathy, a last-ditch survival mechanism. Viktor Frankl, surviving Auschwitz, wrote that the last of human freedoms is to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. But what if depression is the attitude we're forced into when all other choices are stripped away? When the soul goes on strike, refusing to participate in its own annihilation, the tension tightens. Modern psychology pathologizes suffering, yet ancient wisdom traditions revered it. Buddhism's first noble truth, life is suffering. Christianity's darkest saints found God in their desolation. The Aztecs worshipped Tezcatlipoca, the god of night and chaos, understanding that destruction seeds creation. But today, we've medicalized the sacred. A serotonin deficiency can't explain why you weep at the beauty of a dying sunset, or why your body revolts against a life of fluorescent lights and transactional love. Ask yourself this: what if your depression isn't a breakdown, but a wake-up call written in the bone language of your ancestors? You feel it now, the roots of the labyrinth. Its walls are lined with the unspoken, generations who buried their traumas, a culture that swapped rituals for routines, a world that values the measurable over the meaningful. Your mind didn't collapse. It sabotaged the life you were handed, like a prisoner burning down a jail cell to prove they were alive. But the smoke alarms blare, and everyone mistakes the flames for failure. You wake, you work, you scroll, repeat. The routine feels normal, safe, until you notice the ghost limb. It's there when you laugh at a meme but feel nothing. When you say "I'm fine" and taste blood on your tongue. When you touch a lover and realize your skin stopped speaking its language years ago. This isn't burnout. This is grieving. For a self you can't name, a loss you can't remember. The unseen consequences are already here, masquerading as modern life. Hedonic adaptation, the brain's cruel trick, keeps resetting your happiness baseline. You get the promotion, the partner, the praise, and still, the void yawns. Like a dog chasing its tail, you run harder, believing the next milestone will fill you. But the science is clear. Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman proved we're terrible predictors of what will bring joy. Your depression knows this. It's the part of you screaming, "Stop running." The finish line is a hologram. Meanwhile, optimism bias, the delusion that bad things happen to others, turns you into a prisoner of hope. You tolerate the toxic job, the loveless marriage, the gnawing sense of fraudulence, whispering, "Someday it'll get better." But someday is a sedative. The Stoics knew this. By fixating on an imagined future, we colonize the present. Your depression? It's the reckoning. The merciless now where all those bargains with tomorrow collapse. And then there's the neurology of betrayal. Dopamine, the reward chemical, has been hijacked. Swipe, refresh, buy. Each micro hit trains your brain to crave distraction over depth. But dopamine isn't happiness, it's anticipation. A slot machine neurotransmitter. Over time, the real world feels duller. Relationships demand too much. Silence becomes intolerable. You're not addicted to your phone. You're starving for a self that can't survive in a 280-character world. But the true coup is cultural. We've pathologized the soul's immune system. Consider, a 2023 study found that people who suppress negative emotions develop increased physical pain sensitivity. Your grandmother called it a heavy heart. Science calls it psychogenic somatization. The body keeps score, and when the mind refuses to feel, the nerves revolt. Chronic fatigue, migraines, mysterious aches, these aren't glitches. They're the shadow self manifesting through flesh, screaming, "I will be seen." Social media, that hall of mirrors, completes the lobotomy. Platforms profit by making you hate your authentic life while craving ones that don't exist. You post sunsets but delete the captions that whispered, "I'm lonely." You perform wellness while your notes app fills with unsent suicide letters. The algorithm rewards your mask, so the mask becomes your face. Psychologist Erich Fromm saw this coming. Modern man thinks he loses something, time, when he does not do things quickly, yet he does not know what to do with the time he gains, except kill it. Worst of all, we've erased rituals of descent. Indigenous cultures had vision quests. Medieval Christians had pilgrimages. You have TikTok. When a Mohawk adolescent sought purpose, they fasted in the wilderness until a spirit animal appeared. When you seek purpose, you take an Instagram quiz. Which Euphoria character are you? Without rights to honor darkness, despair becomes a pathology instead of a portal. The fallout is everywhere. The ghost ship generation, millennials and zoomers, raised on follow your passion slogans, now adrift in a gig economy that monetizes their identity. Their depression isn't weakness. It's cognitive dissonance from being told they're free while feeling like indentured servants to student loans and algorithmic feeds. The love deficit. Dating apps have turned romance into a stock market, yet loneliness is pandemic. You swipe left on vulnerability, right on curated personas. Therapist Esther Perel warns, we're seeking in others what we've lost in ourselves, the capacity to be alone, to metabolize pain. The productivity cult. Burnout is the new baseline. You track sleep to optimize work, not to feel alive. Korean philosopher Byung-Chul Han calls it the achievement subject, a slave who believes they're free because they exploit themselves voluntarily. Your depression isn't a flaw, it's a counter-ritual. When you stare at the ceiling at 3 a.m., paralyzed by existential static, you're closer to truth than any affirmation could take you. The void isn't empty. It's full of everything you've been told to ignore. Your ancestors called this the dark night of the soul, a sacred unraveling. But modernity medicates it into silence, replacing prophets with Prozac. Here's the trap. The more you numb the symptoms, the louder the cause becomes. A brain scan of someone meditating and someone clinically depressed shows eerily similar activity. Both default mode networks are hyperactive. The difference? The meditative mind invites the darkness in, listens, integrates. The depressed mind, starved of tools and told its pain is poison, wages civil war. You're not broken. You're in rebellion against a counterfeit life. But the clock is ticking. Every suppressed emotion calcifies. Every silent scream metastasizes. The longer you pretend the ghost limb isn't yours, the more it will drag you into the undertow of your own life. You wake in the dark, again. But this time, you don't reach for the phone, the pill, the prayer. You lie still. And in that stillness, a realization detonates. What if the darkness isn't your cage, but your crucible? Rebellion begins here, not with positivity, but with a sacred surrender to the truths your pain carries. Nietzsche's eternal recurrence asked, what if you had to relive your life? every joy and agony infinitely? Would you curse the gods or fall to your knees in gratitude? The answer isn't in the reliving, it's in the reseeing. History's greatest emancipators didn't flee their demons, they recruited them. Consider, Joan of Arc, burned as a heretic, heard voices that medieval society called madness. Today, psychiatrists might diagnose schizophrenia, but those voices also liberated France. Van Gogh painted Starry Nights not despite his psychosis, because of it. His madness was the furnace where swirling cypresses and radiant suns were born. Nelson Mandela mined 27 years of prison for the diamond-hard resolve to dismantle apartheid. "I found solitary confinement the most forbidding aspect of prison life," he wrote. "But it was there I found myself." The pattern is clear. Those who transmute pain into power don't transcend their shadows, they marry them. Here's how to begin your own insurrection. 1. The Nietzschean shift. Amor fati. Love your fate. Stop fighting the void. Invite it to tea. Amor fati, the love of one's fate, isn't resignation. It's the radical act of staring into your depression's eyes and saying, "You too are part of me. Let's discover why." Psychologist James Hillman, Jung's rebellious heir, argued that depression is the psyche's refusal of a life that's too small. When you stop pathologizing your despair, it morphs. The fatigue becomes a strike against meaningless labor. The numbness becomes a boycott of counterfeit connections. The suicidal ideation, a twisted ode to your unmet potential. If this is all there is, I'd rather not exist. Try this. Next time despair floods in, ask it, what are you protecting me from? What truth have I been too cowardly to face? Let the answers rise without judgment. A woman who did this discovered her depression was actually rage. Rage at staying in a marriage that suffocated her creativity. The moment she filed for divorce, the mental illness lifted. 2. The Stoic fire. Premeditatio malorum reborn. The ancient Stoics practiced negative visualization not to dwell on misery, but to detoxify fear. Seneca imagined losing his wealth. You must imagine losing your illusions. Modern application. Write your worst-case biography. If you continue your current path, what corpse will your life be in 10 years? A soul-numbing career? A loveless marriage? A body numbed by SSRIs and SAD lamps? Describe it in visceral detail. The hollow eyes, the stiff hugs, the deathbed regrets. This isn't morbid. It's ignition. When a 34-year-old tech worker did this exercise, he saw himself as a ghost in a Patagonia vest, envying the homeless man outside his office for having a real story. He quit the next month to write a novel. 3. The Kintsugi Protocol, where cracks become gold. In Japan, broken pottery is repaired with gold lacquer, kintsugi, honoring the breaks as part of its history. Your psyche demands the same. Exercise. Map your cracks. Childhood abandonment? Write it in gold ink. Betrayal that left you distrustful? Frame it as a boundary lesson. Even trauma can become post-traumatic growth. Studies show survivors often develop heightened empathy, resilience, and existential clarity. The key isn't to heal your past, but to weave it into your armor. An Afghanistan war veteran, haunted by flashbacks, began viewing his PTSD as a soul injury, a sign his humanity survived the dehumanization of war. He now leads wilderness retreats for vets, using night terrors as guides for shadow work. The Frankl maneuver, stealing meaning from the jaws of suffering. Viktor Frankl's logotherapy was forged in Auschwitz. His insight, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. Your depression is proof you still have that freedom. It's your psyche's refusal to accept a meaningless life. Hijack that refusal. Ask, what if my depression is the cost of betraying my purpose? A teacher realized her antidepressant-resistant despair spiked every time she graded standardized tests. She quit, started a guerrilla theater troupe, and now stages protests against education cuts. Her symptoms only emerge when she compromises her mission. The quantum paradox, holding opposites alive. Here's the secret they never told you. You can feel hopeless about life and deeply committed to living it. Rilke wrote, "Perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses who are only waiting to see us act just once with beauty and courage." Psychiatrist Irvin Yalom works with terminally ill patients. The ones who find peace aren't those who stay positive. They're those who stare into the abyss and still choose to love, create, and connect. Meaning isn't found in avoiding death, but in living in its shadow. A terminally ill artist Yalom counseled began painting her tumors as fantastical creatures, crimson tendrils becoming coral reefs, metastases morphing into stardust. Her final exhibition was titled, "The Cancer That Taught Me How to Bleed in Color." The revelation burning in the marrow of your bones. Your depression isn't the enemy. The enemy is the world that convinced you to abandon the dark, where roots drink and stars are born. Poet David Whyte writes, "The well of grief is where the old ghosts of loss whisper to you, telling you the stories you need to survive." The rebellion isn't about curing yourself. It's about letting your cracked psyche become a prism, shattering the lie of normalcy into fractured, radiant light. You stand at the mirror, but it's no longer glass. It's a portal. The face staring back is a mosaic of every version of you that's ever been buried. The child who cried into their pillow, the rebel who bit their tongue, the lover who chose safety over wildfire. For years you fought these ghosts, labeled them symptoms, drugged them into submission. But now, a forbidden truth ignites in your chest. Depression isn't your curse, it's your inheritance, a lineage of unlived lives demanding to be resurrected. The ultimate revelation is this: your pain is not a detour, it's the path. Science and mysticism converge here. Quantum physics whispers that black holes aren't voids, they're engines of creation, birthing new stars from collapsed matter. Neuroscientists find that depressive episodes often precede cognitive spring-loading, where the brain rewires itself for heightened creativity. Even evolution agrees, our capacity for existential despair is what pushed humans beyond animal instinct, to bury our dead, paint cave walls, and ask, why? But modernity inverted this wisdom. We treat the soul's quantum leap as a disease. Consider the myth of Inanna, the Sumerian goddess who descended into the underworld. At each of the 7 gates, she surrendered a piece of her crown, her jewels, her robes, until she stood naked before her sister Ereshkigal, goddess of the dead. Suspended on a meat hook, rotting for 3 days, Inanna's corpse birthed the first poem. From my silence came the language of storms. From my decay, the roots of the cedar. You are Inanna. Your depression strips you of false identities, borrowed dreams, the armor of fine. What's left is raw, quivering, real. Psychologist Carl Rogers called this the process of becoming, when the self you've constructed dissolves, allowing the organic self to emerge. But culture calls it a breakdown. No wonder you've been afraid. Here's the dragon guarding your treasure. The darkness you fear is the womb of your becoming. When Vincent van Gogh painted the starry night from his asylum window, he wrote to Theo, "The sight of the stars always makes me dream. Why, I ask myself, shouldn't the shining dots of the sky be as accessible as the black dots on the map of France?" His madness was a telescope. a way to see beyond the visible spectrum. Your depression is the same, a cracked lens, a smuggler of starlight. But how to trust this? How to stop fearing the undertow, the alchemical keys, the paradox of purpose? Viktor Frankl's prisoners who survived Auschwitz often cited Nietzsche. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. But Frankl added a darker corollary. The quest for meaning is not what makes us human. It's what makes us suffer as humans. Your depression isn't a sign you've lost your purpose. It's proof you're alive enough to crave one. The sacred split. Jung's shadow isn't a flaw. It's your unlived life. Every time you silenced a truth, buried a desire, or wore a mask, a piece of you broke off and formed the shadow. Your depression is the cumulative weight of these exiles. To integrate them, stop asking, "How do I fix myself?" and start asking, "Which parts of me are still waiting to be lived?" The antidote to amnesia. Philosopher Maxine Greene said, "We are the ones who forgot we're ancestors." Your depression guards ancestral memories of lovers your lineage never mourned, talents they suppressed to survive, rebellions they swallowed. A client once dreamt of hands weaving black thread. She later discovered her foremothers were silent textile artists during the Industrial Revolution. She took up weaving, and her treatment-resistant depression lifted. Coincidence or reclamation? There's a question your bones have been asking since the first time you thought, "I can't do this anymore." What if the life you're clinging to is the one that's killing you, and the death you fear is the threshold of the life you need? This is the dragon's gift. Depression, at its core, is soul memory. It knows the exact cost of the lies you've swallowed, the promotions that shrank your spirit, the relationships that demanded your disappearance, the versions of success that sterilized your wildness. It's not trying to kill you, it's trying to kill what's killing you. So let the old life burn. Let the pills collect dust. Let the therapist's chair stay empty. Let the world call you reckless as you dance in the ashes of who you were told to be. In the end, only one law matters. The seed must crack for the tree to rise. Your depression is the crack. Epilogue. The stars in your marrow. You walk outside tonight. The moon hangs like a kintsugi bowl, its cracks glowing. Somewhere, a wolf howls, not in sorrow, but in remembrance of its pack. You taste the air, electric with the truth you can't unknow. Darkness is not the absence of light. It's the presence of everything light hasn't touched yet. So let your despair be the ink. Let your numbness be the parchment. Let your rage be the hand that writes the manifesto of your rebirth. The world needs your cracks. The world needs your ghosts. The world needs the story only your darkness can tell. Now, begin.